This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Sector-specific risks, page 75. Business risks may be simply general risks faced by any business, but some will be specific to a particular entity, market or industry, which makes obvious sense, doesn't it? There's no need for me to say that. What's the risk facing your business?
Steel price, iron prices.
Iron prices, out of control. And presumably you import? You don't get iron...
No, we don't produce here, but generally yes.
Yeah, and so you're facing then foreign currency risk, exchange rate risk. But that's not sector specific because it's anyone who imports, isn't it? What about yours?
We are pharma industry.
Farming?
No, pharmaceutical.
Drugs. Do you make money from drug dealing?
Medicine.
All right, medicines. Okay.
Patent expires and then generics come in.
Yeah, but you also then specifically have the risk of drugs which are not thoroughly tested being released onto the market, and that's what the drug agency is for, to make sure that it's properly tested. But there was a big, huge case about 50 years ago in the UK about a drug called, can I remember? I'll remember it. It'll hit me in the middle of the next sentence or so, which caused birth defects from children, and it was given as a relaxant drug to pregnant women, which is unfortunate. I should be telling you this story now because it affects more than one of you. It nearly came to me. But they had enormous amounts to pay. Chemical companies, a big chemical explosion in India about 20-30 years ago in a city called Bhopal, and Union Carbide was the American company, and they've still, I believe, not paid anything by way of damages, but a chemical cloud, like there was in the Ukraine with the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, a chemical cloud or a radioactive cloud like that can cause phenomenal damage. And a nuclear explosion, obviously, is specific to the nuclear industry. So they are some which are particularly specific to the entity, the company, market, the industry. Generic risks include things like interest rates or non-compliance with law. It's back on page 75. In addition, although risk may be general, it can affect different businesses in different ways. This exchange rate risk that we're just talking about with ACCA, the exchange rate risk operates two ways. When the exchange rate is adverse for you, it's obviously beneficial for the supplier. And this is what the big argument or big discussion is at the moment, particularly the Americans who said that the Chinese currency is undervalued, and it's therefore adversely affecting American imports and American export, one or the other. It's badly affecting them because of the yuan being undervalued. But the Chinese are happy because they're getting all the business because their yuan is undervalued. So it's a balance, isn't it? What's bad for you may be good for me. An example then is change in interest rates clearly have the opposite effects. So one company with a substantial deposit at the bank and another one that's got a large overdraft. So it's not just the bank compared with the customer, it's one customer with money in the bank and one customer who's borrowed money from the bank. That one change is both a good effect on one and a bad effect on the other. Sector-specific risks relate to the particular sector and potentially not to any other sector. For example, sector-specific risks facing a private hospital could be, oh dear, there's nothing there. Oh dear, page 75. The sector-specific risks facing a private hospital. Well, we need to put something in there. I'm going to have to ask you to do some work instead of just sitting there collectively, looking interested. Go on then, sector-specific risks facing a private hospital.
That some doctor made some mistake.
If a doctor makes a mistake, yeah, if a doctor makes... There was a thing on the news about a quadriplegic. It was on the news this last 2 days. Did you see that? A quadriplegic, a person who's pretty much disabled, completely disabled, But his mind was still active, and he was not happy about the sort of home care he was getting. So he's had private security cameras installed. And a nurse who was a new nurse, an inexperienced nurse, accidentally unplugged him. And his mouth, you can see his mouth on the cameras, you can see his mouth moving, trying to bring the attention of this woman to the fact that she's unplugged his life support system. And she didn't see him, and he died. And it's there on camera. It's there on YouTube or on the internet, on the CNN News. So, yeah, if a doctor makes a mistake, that's a pretty big risk that the hospital is going to face some legal action. Another risk facing a private hospital. What's the idea of private hospitals? Why do private hospitals exist? What's the matter with the normal, general type hospital for everyday people and everyday illnesses? What's the matter with them? Well, in the UK, certainly, I don't know what it's like over here. In the UK, there are tremendously long waiting lists. When I used to live in North Manchester, I had a neighbour who was waiting for a hip replacement. And he walked, his hip was really painful and agony, and he'd been on the hospital waiting list for 6 years. And on the basis that every now and then he would ring up and say, how am I doing? Am I getting anywhere near the top of the pile? And they'd say, yes, you're getting closer and closer. And he rang up, and he was telling me this about 9 years ago. He rang up, and they said, we can't find your records. So can you get your doctor to fill that, and can you start again at the bottom of the pile? Hospital waiting. So if you go to a private hospital, then you're in and out in 2-3 days. So private hospitals fill the demand where people are in urgent need of medical attention. But what if the general hospitals, the public hospitals, improve their performance and improve their service? Then the demand for private hospitals is going to fall. So the risk facing the private hospital is that the public sector will improve its performance. My father went for a hip replacement about 10 years ago. And I took him along to the private hospital. I took him along, and we had an interview with the doctor. The doctors have to see that it's worthwhile doing. If my father had been a very old person and having to use a walking frame to get around and sits in a chair all day, but he wasn't. He was an active man. Even 10 years ago, when he was substantially very old, but he's still active, and his brain was very active. And so the doctor finished up saying, well, you do seem to be an appropriate candidate to have a hip replacement done. And can I reassure you that you will be able to do anything? You'll be able to live your life as normal. And so I asked the doctor and said, will he be able to play golf? And the doctor said, oh, yes, not a problem. I said, well, that's a miracle. He can't play golf at the moment. He doesn't know how to play golf. But if he can play golf after his hip replacement, that's wonderful. So that's a further risk facing a private hospital. Another risk, inability to employ staff of the appropriate calibre. If the general hospitals improve the wage rates of nurses and consultants and doctors and anaesthetists, then these qualified people will possibly not be interested in working at a private hospital. Or the private hospital itself will have to increase the rates in order to attract the people of the appropriate calibre. Another risk could be if another private hospital opens up next door. If there's another facility available. Or general improvement in general health. If the population, that's not really one, is it? Because not everybody is generally going to improve in health, and no matter what we do, we're all still going to get older. I mean, you're looking older today than you did yesterday. And because you are older, you're another day gone, aren't you? One more step nearer the end. One more step nearer to the finish line. We all are. It's just that some of us are closer to the finish line than others. So they're not sure about general health. Changes in medical practice, maybe improvements in drugs which keep more people out of hospital for longer. Maybe that would be a sector specific. But you've got to, in that sort of situation, if that question were asked, identify the risks faced by the company, you've got to let your imagination go. There is a past exam question on it, actually, called Doctor's Practice. There's a past exam, I'm not sure if it's a past exam, it's certainly in the revision kit. Identify the risks faced by this doctor's practice that wanted to open a little clinic where the doctors, the general practitioner doctors, would be able to perform small operations. Like if you've got a growth on the back of your hand, they would be able to cut that out instead of having to go to the hospital to do it. They also, because it's a hospital, they would need a supply of drugs available, and as soon as drugs become available, then people who are drug addicts will then be more tempted to break in, rather than if it was not a place where drugs were stored. So you have to just let your imagination flow. Just pretend you're in a real-life situation and think about what the problems would be that were facing a particular company in a particular sector. The analysis of risk on page 17.6. The analysis of risk. One way of analysing risk is to acknowledge the probability of risk could be a high or low, and the consequences, the impact of that risk hitting us, that could also be a high consequence or a low consequence. It could be a major consequence or not so major. And what we have down here at the bottom of page 76 is the matrix of probability set against impact and consequence, and it's similar to the Mendelow matrix, where he identifies the impact of stakeholders and stakeholders' claims. The Mendelow matrix, where he analyses the impact of stakeholders who have low impact and low probability, but then they get together and they create a greater probability that they will take action, even though it may only be a low impact action and low consequences. So it's a similar matrix to that, and it's the analysis of risk to determine if this risk does occur, what is the likely impact and what is the chance of it occurring. And so you've got there, coming down the bullet points, you've got your four possibilities of high, 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 low, low, high and low, low. When a risk is seen as high, high, it needs urgent attention. Immediate action. It's high probability and it's going to hurt us badly. So that's urgent attention. It needs addressing. It needed addressing yesterday, let alone today. It needed addressing before it became high probability and high consequence. If it's high probability and low impact, the position needs to be monitored, and we need to be prepared for any change. It's likely to happen, so let's get ready for it. The probability is only low, the third possibility, the southwest possibility. It's probably only a low probability, but it could have a big consequence. It's not likely to happen. It's maybe only 5, 6, 10% chance of it happening. But if it does, then it's going to have a big impact on us. And then we need to consider a contingency plan. Consider contingencies. And low is, just keep it in mind. Just be aware that there is a risk. It's not going to hurt us particularly badly, and it's not really got much of a chance of happening. So just keep it in mind. Keep an eye on the situation to see that it stays low. And if it moves, if it becomes low probability but high impact, then we need to think about the contingency plan. If it's low probability but high probability but low impact, then again monitor the situation. Just keep on top of it and see what's happening. Page 77, the role of the board in risk analysis. It's their job. It's one of their jobs, one of their roles, one of their functions, is to keep an eye on and to do this risk analysis exercise. So it's an important role to play in risk management because it's they who consider the risk at the strategic level, and then they will define the company's attitude, the company's appetite, whether they are risk takers. Oh yeah, this could happen. Well, we're looking forward to it because it's going to be a new world tomorrow. So there may be high appetite. They may have a strong appetite for risk. So it's the board and their strategy. And who was it? Oh, it was in last exam's question. I remember reading it about a man who'd been appointed as chief executive to the executive officer to a bank. And because of his aggressive risk attitude, his risk approach, the bank did very well for 5 years, but then with the crisis, the bank has then collapsed. He's lost his job, he's claiming 2 years redundancy, loss of compensation for loss of office. And it was a question involving risk and risk appetite and risk management committees. So that came up in the last exam. The board is responsible for implementing the risk management process and therefore for ensuring that those charged with administering it have appropriate resources. It's all right determining what our attitude and what our strategy is going to be, but if we don't provide the funds so that we can implement the strategy, then there's no point in having a strategy. So we need to make sure that those who are charged with the responsibility of administering the risk management process, that there is sufficient resource in terms of time, and therefore in terms of people available, human resource, as well as the financial resource available. The board is also responsible for ensuring the policies support the overall strategic objectives. Part of the definition of internal control is that internal control is not just internal check and internal audit, but the whole system of controls, financial and otherwise, established by the management in order to ensure adherence to management policies. Once management has established the strategy, that's the road we're going to go down. In fact, we can actually go one step back. We can go back to 9 o'clock yesterday morning and say that corporate governance is defined. But I can't remember the definition now. Oh, Lord. Oh, help me with the definition. It's a system whereby a company is directed and controlled. That's right. It's a system whereby a company is directed and controlled. Yeah. So the board is responsible to make sure that any risk management policy that strategy and therefore policy that they choose to adopt is in line with their focused mission statement, their objectives, their defined adherence to where they have decided they want the company to go. The board will determine the level of risk which we're prepared to accept. And some companies are prepared to accept substantially greater risk. Other companies tend to be rather more conservative with a small c, tend to be rather more cautious and rather more prudent than the risk takers. This is called risk appetite. And some boards of directors are risk avaricious. They hunger for risk. Avaricious. They're hungry for risk. They like risk. They thrive on risk. Risk is what drives them and motivates them. So some boards of directors are very risky and big risk takers, whereas others will be very conservative and try as much as they can to avoid risk. So the level of risk which the company is prepared to accept in order to meet its strategic objectives, this is something for the board to determine. If it's a matter for board's consideration, again within the concept of corporate governance, did we not establish that one of the principles of the Cadbury Code, the combined code, was that there should be a list of matters to be decided by the board, not by delegation to other people, and this is one of them. The company's attitude to risk is a board decision. It's not something to be delegated. And it was the delegation which caused the problem with the guy in the two cases I mentioned just before break. The Nick Leeson situation, where he was dealing in derivatives in Singapore, and the guy in France just this last month, who cost Societe Generale some billions of euros. The board will communicate the risk management strategy to the rest of the company. That's an interesting concept as well, isn't it? That the board is going to have a meeting of all the company's employees, and they're going to say, we've called you all together because we're going to tell you about our risk management strategy. Are you aware of your employer's risk management strategy? Do you know what the strategy is? Do you know? Do you know what the strategy is? No? Well, the board should be and is responsible for communicating the company's attitude to risk and the strategy for managing it. It should be communicated to you, because you people who are employed, you're the workers, you're the ones who have to make sure that this policy of managing risk is actually applied in practice. And if you don't know, then how can you apply? You need to go back to your employers on Monday and say, listen, you directors, I want a word with you. You should be telling me what your risk management strategy is. You do that, but don't mention my name. The board will review the risks, and it will then identify and monitor the progress of risk management policies. What was that Scottish football team called? What was the Scottish football team called? Hairdryer without the human resource, yes. And what do we do with the first two letters? We change those round, don't we? So we finish up with airdrie. Remind me. Go on. Indulge me. Tell me what the letters in airdrie stand for. Identify, and then analyse. Another word for analyse begins with a P, and it's not probity. What's the name of the English cricket wicket keeper? The man who keeps wicket for the England cricket team. What's he called? Do you not know? Do you not know anything? Good Lord, you people! He's called Prior. A man called Prior, Prior. So the second one, which is analyse, an alternative word for analyse would be prioritise. Yes, so you know the name of the England wicketkeeper. You're not going to forget that, are you? So identify, prioritise, then R, report, and then D, design, and then R, recommend, and then I, implement, and E, evaluate and monitor, yes. So you've got airdrie there. Identify, analyse, report, design, recommend, implement, and evaluate. The board will determine the risks which can be accepted but which cannot be managed, or where it's too expensive to manage them. These are called residual risks. The risks that a company faces and it can't do anything about them. There's nothing it can do. How can you stop aeroplanes flying into your apartment? What can I do into your building? What can I do to manage the risk of a car damaging my fourth floor apartment? Well, I have transferred the risk. I have insured against it. But there's a greater risk. That's just risk of damage to the apartment. What about the risk of damage to me? I suppose the answer there will be continually look out of the window to see if any cars are approaching. But I can't be doing that either. Page 78, external reporting. Should reports be made to people other than management concerning the internal controls and risk management? Now, we've already discussed the concept of reporting to other people about the internal controls, and I think we decided, I hope we agreed, that it would be wrong, it would be ill-advised to report, for instance, to shareholders about internal controls and where things are going wrong and where things are possibly going right. It just would not be appropriate. But what about the company's attitude to risk management? Should that not be identified to shareholders? Do you not think that we could put this into somewhere within the financial statements? Sorry, not within the financial statements, but within the book which contains the financial statements. You know that companies, they produce books, maybe subsidiary companies out here, subsidiaries of bigger companies over somewhere else. Maybe you don't produce a book, maybe all you do is produce schedules. But if it's the parent company, you'll often find that a set of financial statements is literally within an 80 or 100-page booklet. And somewhere within that, would it not be appropriate to put, yeah, your company will do, would it not be appropriate to put a report from the Risk Management Committee or the Risk Committee? Do you know, I think it probably would. Just to notify people that, yes, your manager has taken a responsible attitude and responsible stance with reference to management of risk. Your assets, your company's assets, we appreciate, we've identified the risks which we face, and this is how we're managing those risks. I think that would be appropriate. Let's see what they don't say. The points to consider: reporting may be required or it may be voluntary. Discuss, should it be required or should it be voluntary? It really depends on the nature of the business, doesn't it, I think? It depends on the nature of the business. You big four audit firms, you will have policies and procedures within the firm which manage the risk of issuing an inappropriate audit opinion. You manufacturing employees, you would have risks of faulty manufactured goods, so you could start telling the shareholders about the quality control processes that your companies adopt. You could identify any new drugs. If you're dealing in medicines and drugs, you could identify any new ones which are hopefully going to come onto the market and they're in the final stages of being tested or getting approval, and if they do come onto the market, then... So you can identify all these sort of things in terms of better communication to the stakeholders who are interested in what the company's up to, and stakeholders who are then interested in the exposure to risk that their company is facing. I think that would be a sensible thing to do. In an extreme situation, it may be that third parties have to be reported to, where management is unaware of reporting requirements or simply refuses to report voluntarily. So it is an extreme situation that the auditors may find that they're in the position where they feel they have to report to the regulatory authorities. It's an unusual situation, but if management is not aware that they have to report, or they are aware that they have to but they are refusing, then the auditors, following legal advice, the auditors would then take it upon themselves to report to the relevant authority. Many reports are intended for internal use only, for example, reports to the audit committee. But there can be situations where external reporting is required, and it will normally only be done as a requirement of compliance with law or regulation, or compliance with ethical guidelines applicable either to the company itself or to whoever it is that's blowing the whistle or drafting or making the report. The possibilities of reporting, there are three obvious ways in which we can disseminate this information. We can do it through the financial statements, or the auditors could do it, or the audit committee themselves could do it. So here we have on page 79 the possibilities for reporting attitude and management of risk to external parties. The annual financial statements, we've got both internal control and risk to think about. The annual financial statements, disclosure is required of the principles outlined within corporate governance regulations, but it's only for listed companies. Other companies, there's no reason why any other companies or non-for-profit organisations, why they shouldn't adopt corporate governance principles, but there's not a requirement for them. But for listed companies and public interest companies, then they should be adopting corporate governance principles and they should be complying with regulation. And disclosure is required. Detail is to be given in a statement of the director's assessment of the adequacy of the internal control system. But it's bland. It's a bland comment. It's almost tasteless. The directors have reviewed the system for internal control and they are satisfied that the system is adequate for the size of organisation. But you can put that to any company. The small company like mine down the road or this one here, it's just a bland statement. The directors have reviewed the system of internal control and we're satisfied that it is appropriate for the size of organisation. But it can apply to your national telephone company. It could apply to big four audit firms or to iron and steel industries and drug manufacturers and washing machine people. We've reviewed the system of internal control and we're satisfied that it's appropriate for the size of organisation. It's meaningless, isn't it? It's like you telling me that 23,000 is a huge number. We had that yesterday. 23,000 is a huge number. No, it's not. 23 trillion zillion would be a huge number, but 23,000 isn't, unless you happen to be one of the 23,000. Annual financial statements, risk. Using the financial statements to identify the risk management attitude and the risk management policies. Disclosure should be made explaining how the directors have addressed some of the risks facing the entity. Wow. Some of the risks? What do you think? Why not all of the risks, or just a general comment about attitude? It's like that poster over there that says several stakeholders are satisfied. There's several of them are, but what about the rest who aren't satisfied? Disclosure would be made, for instance, in the Corporate and Social Responsibility Report, or even a report by the Risk Management Committee or the Risk Committee. They could have, why not give them 2 pages of report to fill in with a report from them about their attitude and their management policies. Auditors and internal controls, you don't normally report outside, do you, about the adequacy of internal controls? Any of you Big Four find that you've ever reported outside about the adequacy of companies' internal controls? It will be most unusual. Your audit work is often heavily dependent upon your assessment of internal controls, and you will report your assessment and your findings to the management, but you don't normally report outside. Only in the situation where internal controls are so weak and there were no adequate substantive testing that you could do, in that situation then you're facing a modified audit opinion. Modified report may therefore include details of particular areas of the control system which have given us cause for concern. But how unusual is that? It's really quite a rare event that the auditors are going to modify their audit report where they feel that the internal control system is inadequate. With reference to risk, we'd only report on risk facing the company in the situation that it's given rise to material misstatement or material error in the financial statements. So it's not a likely occurrence again. I can't remember ever reading an audit report which was qualified on the grounds of risk having given rise to material misstatement. Have you come across any of you Big Four auditors? Have you come across any? No? None of you? No. I'd say it's got to be a very rare occurrence. The audit committee reporting on internal controls, reporting externally on internal controls. In the normal course of events, the audit committee will report its recommendations about control weaknesses within the company. They're going to receive these reports from the internal auditor or the internal audit function. They will get the reports through to the audit committee. The audit committee will read and assess and digest and think and then report to the full board about the internal auditor's recommendations. And again, only in an extreme situation. For instance, if the board is ignoring recommendations and the situation is serious, only then would the audit committee even think about reporting externally, and I have never seen it. I have never ever come across a situation where the audit committee reports externally and they blow the whistle. Any of you aware of any? Do you read regularly the financial statements of public companies? Is this the sort of thing you go to curl up in bed with of an evening? You sit down there and just read these financial statements and go. It's a way of curing insomnia. The inability to sleep is get hold of some financial statements. Audit committee risk, most unusual. I can't imagine a situation where it would even be justified. I can't see that the audit committee is going to report externally on matters concerning risk.